коллеги, уважаемые...
Colleagues, distinguished friends, we resume one of the most interesting and crucial round table. Zero waste is the source of modernization. We all know that the world has changed, substantially increased the round of the stakeholders that claim a lot in the area of ecology. If the regulators of the Russian Federation, now it's investors, community of vendors, suppliers, employees, requirements as new rule of business success, public relationships, which must be taken into consideration by the corporations and society. We remember that it was term of the Black Swan about the unpredictable events that have influence and impact on economics. Now we can say that we have green swans, the events of the climate change, loss of biodiversity, and the consequences that these green swans perform in relation to the economics and industrial policy. Now we have national programs of ecology supervised by Vice President Abramchenko, Deputy Prime Minister, and the driver of change of industrial policy will be large corporations that set the tone in relation to business. Russian railways are the largest employer of the country. More than 900 people work for the holding, 2.5 million people work in the industry. And Russian Railways is the greenest system in the country. Holding can and must be green locomotive for the countries and economics and set the trend in streamlining of the industry. Coming to the final point of the vendor and supplier and customer, it has potential, has strategy 2030. Besides, we see that international practice of Europe, in Europe, European Union allots 20% for international financial assistance. And all state institutions of European Union declared carbon neutrality. Companies who participate, if they don't have carbon neutrality, they will lose position in the game in the global market if they don't comply with green standards. We all know European Union reviewed the goals of ecological policy till 2030. The final goal is to cut CO2 by 40% instead of cutting 40%. They decided to cut by 55% CO2 emissions. It's wide-scale change with which we have European Green Deal and anything related to it. The first swallow of green course, in particular for the Russian business, is trans-border carbon tax. According to the plan, since 2023 till 2025, we'll have transitional period, while the partners every quarter will have to report about de facto emissions. In other words, they will have to pay taxes abroad. Paying taxes will start in 2026, when the mechanism of trans-border carbon regulation will finally be enacted and partners will buy relevant carbon certificate. Suppliers of Russian goods would be carbon footprint will pay to European Union at least 1.1 billion euros per year, when authorities of European countries will fully organize trans-border tax, officially suggested by European Commission on 14th of July. It's the RBC information. The organization is responsible for consultations with European Union regarding carbon tax. We realize that this decision touches a huge number of economical spheres, financial, technological, social, educational. Within the framework of our discussion, I would like to discuss old and new approaches to the formation of the strategies, both Russian and international, building of the system of financing ecological projects in Russia, and the future technologies of development. In other words, what we have now and what will be introduced in the near future, the potential of the consumers in the sphere of the green transportation. In our session, we have representatives of different organizations, in particular, Vladimir Andreev, Acting Deputy General Director of the Corporation of Russian Railways, Dmitry Aksakov, Executive Director of Business Block of Corporation of Development, WebRF, Alexander Sherkuber, General Director, Terbachuru Planungsgesellschaft, Alexander Grigoriev, Deputy General Director of Institute of Problems of Natural Monopolies. Alexander is present online. Igor Sahim, Head of Department Development of Future Technologies of Transmash Holding. Artur Nurmuhamedov and Alexander Nikitin, Deputy General Director of the SKM Corporation. We have experts. Andrei Ptishnikov, he's present online. Deputy Head of the Center of Reliable Usage of Resources of Geographical Institute of Russian Academy of Science. Anatoly Lipsky, President of Acoustic Group Company. Considering the scale of the topic and broadness of the rounds of speakers, please speak no more than 8 minutes. To start, I'd like to have a small survey. I'd like to make sure that we have QR code on the screen so the members of the audience have opportunity to answer principal question of our round table. What stimulus for implementation of different ecological standards, different ecological philosophies can we see, colleagues? We need to download. If you have mobile gadget, you can download QR code and participate in this voting. You can see questions on the screen. With your permission, I will not read. Select the one that seems appropriate for you. And please, afterwards, vote. As I understand, there is no global winner, but the main is the investor requirement, which is reasonable, and I hope every speaker will characterize what to him seems to be the key stimulus for sustainable development. If we start discussion, first speaker will be Vladimir Yevgenievich Andreev, Deputy General Director and Chief Engineer of the Russian Railways. Mr. Chief Engineer, the first question about environment. It's been paid attention by all railway companies of the world. Do it. And every company has got ecological strategy. How is situation in the Russian railways? Good afternoon, colleagues. I need second slide, please. Till recent times in our company, let's say we had strategy. It was always, it doesn't correspond to the modern challenges. and we corrected it based on principles of sustainable development. Development of ecological strategy till 2030, we focused at the national goals of development of the countries in developing of comfortable, safe environment for the population. So goals and objectives. As the priority, we selected increase of
с интенсивным переходом на траекторию низкоуглеродного развития, минимизация влияния производственной деятельности компании на траекториях присутствия и обеспечение ликвидации объектов накопленного экологического ущерба. Для достижения целевых параметров мы ставим основными задачами в стратегии это задействовать научный потенциал для проведения исследований по внедрению экологически чистых видов топлива, разработки накопителей энергии, энергосберегающих технологий, проводить активную работу по сокращению потребления топливно-энергетических ресурсов и природных ресурсов за счет перехода на возобновляемые источники.
Switching to renewable sources of energy, perfection of industrial guidelines, considering greenhouse gases emission that assess the carbon footprint. The new ecological strategy was approved at this hearing of the Russian Railways Board of Directors. It will be confirmed. Thank you.
А какие параметры и цели в сфере экологии РЖД достигнуты уже сейчас?
Третий поставьте слайд, пожалуйста. Мы для наглядности презентацию сделали. За 13-летний период, вот как на слайде, мы прошли большой путь от фактически сложившегося потребления до ответственного отношения к природе. За это время, вот с 7 по 20 год, выбросы загрязняющих веществ от стационарных источников снижены на 66%, от передвижных источников на 34%.
We cut the pollution of waste waters by 73%. In 2020, we liquidated wastewater without treatment. The share of the waste increased by 23% till 2020. It was more than 83% of all formed waste. The fourth slide, please. If we look at the achieved values of the key directions, we will see the following picture. Through electrification of more than 2,000 kilometers of railways and decommissioning of 60,000 old rolling stock, purchase of 7,000 locomotives with better ecological parameters, switching the boiler houses to economical fuel and renewable sources of energy, implementation of 150 gas treatment equipment units. Pollution was cut by 138,000 tons. Water consumption in the railways cut by 93 million cubic meters through exclusion of the water-intensive technological process. It's dry cleaning compressors will be cooled by air. Untreated waters during 2007 till 2021 was cut. We built 117 units for treatment of the wastewater. Sixth slide. In the area of treatment of waste, we licensed 1,000 facilities for more than 1,000 3 and 4 class of hazard. Placement of the Orsk waste polygon, also in Yaroslavl. Treatment of rubber waste at ukладочная, perm-сортировочная for complexes of the old concrete sleepers in Sverdlovsky Railway. 579 facilities of neutralization of the acids. Implemented 130 units of the LED with the usage of dangerous bulbs. Since 2016, biodecomposition polyethylene units, 11 times less now. Thank you very much, Vladimir Dmitrievich. The next question. What are the instruments that the corporation uses to protect environment? What allows to achieve the parameters?
Well, to create an internal system for verification of how this company influences the environment and to comply with the government regulations, we have organized a very powerful structure for environmental measurements. It includes the monitoring of the atmospheric air, of the surface, of industrial waste, industrial emissions, but also ground and underground water. The system includes 56 stationary environmental laboratories. All of them have been accredited by the National System for Accreditation and licensed to operate in the area of hydrometeorology and adjacent areas. The lab is equipped with highly skilled experts. The lab has all the necessary equipment to do chemical analysis and to process the results. Today, we're actively involved in developing this system, and we have been introducing elements of automatic control. Thank you, Vladimir. Then my next question is to the executive director of the business block of Development Corporation, Dmitry Aksakov. Dmitry, there are gene bank instruments, and they're getting more and more popular both worldwide and in Russia. The company has raised investments for social and environmental projects. Green financial instruments are now widely used worldwide. The social instruments have been growing quite actively in the year 2020. In your opinion, what are the outlooks for the growth of these instruments in Russia? How soon will the companies be able to issue bonds for social projects and projects would be interested for investors in particular? Sergey, thank you very much for your question. But I would like to begin by saying that the survey you did before the discussion it encouraged me to think about the following. You know, my diploma on the brink between material sciences and technical sciences. I'm in the pharmacy, so I like to think, what does a phenomenon come from? What would be the incentive for the company to disclose its indicators? Why do investors think about it? I think that the reason for this is that initially the society wanted this, then politicians heard this. And this is why the government started to introduce certain requirements to investment funds and the corporate operations. As a result, this generated sustainable policies and a whole industry of agencies that rate companies with respect to their ESG compliance. But clearly, in addition to the demand of the society, there are enthusiastic companies that have begun this a long time ago. And the Russian Railways is actually one of such companies, one of the pioneers, trendsetters in this respect. The Russian Railways have introduced various initiatives with respect to sustainable development, but also they were the trendsetters in green bonds and social bonds in international markets. One of the first Russian trendsetters, I mean. And we at the VB Russian Bank for Economic Development, we see that there's a whole trend worldwide towards sustainable development. And the government instructed us to develop a Russian standard for green financing. The standard that we started to draft 1.5 years ago is almost ready. We presented for the first time at the government 1 year ago. We received lots of comments from various ministries and from the market. And now we are expecting that the Russian green finance funding standard would be approved by the government. It will be one of these days, actually. So it will enable to issue official Russian green bonds. Some companies have been doing this already in accordance with a draft that we published on our website. But we expect that the government will publish its decree this autumn. So this is why many more companies are going to enter this market this autumn. Now, as for the social bonds, the standard is also being developed at the moment. The Ministry of Economic Development instructed us to submit it to the government by the end of this year. We're now in active coordination with the market. But let's make one step back to green funding. The worldwide demand for green bonds is huge. The number of such instruments which have been issued or are in float has already exceeded $1 trillion. And quite often the high demand for such instruments results in the following. Those who would like to lend, to borrow money, can borrow this money at a lower rate as a result. So we saw that we could save 15 to 25 basis points on the rate. This is not applicable for all companies. There are companies that borrow at much lower rates, but overall, borrowing money via green instruments and social instruments is a much better deal. This slide shows the key documents that we have already decided, that we have already developed, and that are going to be published in the near future. So these are the guidelines. That is an explanation how you can apply the green status to your instrument, and the taxonomy of the projects. That is the areas which can be funded via green financial instruments. I will focus on these instruments in particular. Now, clearly we talk about utilization and processing of waste, green energy, green construction, green industry, but also green transport. This is the area where the Russian railways have raised their funding via green financial instruments. Water supply, water treatment, natural landscape, rivers, water reservoirs, biodiversity, and green agriculture. As we were developing these instruments, we're looking towards how this green financial system operates worldwide, because we see a huge demand on the part of the investors. And clearly we'd like to raise money both in Russia and outside Russia by issuing Russian financial instruments. So we tried our best to create a very clear system that will be clear for international investors too. This slide gives a short overview of how we comply with international regulations on green funding in accordance with the main international classifications. We realize that there are lots of areas in Russia which cannot be called green in the classical sense of this word. And we realized that we need to introduce another area in the taxonomy that would focus on transition of conventional dirty industries to the industrial production that cannot be brought into compliance with the rigid European standards. We also listed these areas that can be funded using the transition financial instruments. And considering that the slide shows to what extent our methodology meets the international methodologies, we at the bank, well, we were asking, why do we need a separate Russian methodology? Because there are international norms. Well, we had to do this because, firstly, we needed to have a place at the negotiations table. That's one. And two, we wanted to tie government support measures to social and green instruments. I mean, subsidies, especially regulations on the part of the Bank of Russia, certain tax incentives, etc., etc. And like I said, the government will issue its decree on green bonds this autumn. We expected it to be issued in summer, but it will be issued in autumn. And the special taxonomy will be presented to the government by the end of this year. Thank you, Dmitry. My next question is to Alexander Scherhuber, CEO of Breitspruchplanung Gesellschaft. So, good morning, Alexander. The purpose of the joint venture established by the railway companies of Austria, Russia, Slovakia, and Ukraine is to create a continuous, seamless logistics corridor between Asia and Europe by extending the existing 1520 line towards the area of Vienna and Bratislava in Europe. But considering this huge geography, to what extent do you intend to introduce sustainable development principles over this geography? And to what extent are we going to comply with the existing environmental norms?
So now it works, right? Sorry. Thank you for this beautiful question, dear ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the possibility to present again our project, maybe to update also on the current status that will, of course, include the answer of the question as well. As you mentioned in the very beginning, I would say, very special composition of these 4 shareholders is sometimes a challenge, but is actually the solution to solve all the, I would say, very critical questions that we have to face nowadays. Since we're coming from a health crisis that is now developing to an economic and financial crisis, the Austrian perspective is always we invest in infrastructure and then we save our economy. And I think this is a recipe that the European Union was actually following now with the new investment plan and recovery plan that was decided by the European Commission. So that means investing in infrastructure is always a good solution if you want to improve your economy. Now we have the situation that we want to come out from an economic crisis. We have at the same time a very, very green trend, a very strong trend, and we have the need of digitization. And everything comes at the same time. And what I will show as well is that we developed further our project that is not anymore just the extension of the 1520 from Košice to Vienna. It includes, in the meanwhile, all 4.0 trends. That means industry 4.0, logistics 4.0, work 4.0, payment 4.0, administration 4.0. Because we are very convinced that green has to include all digitization trends as well. Otherwise, we will not keep up with reducing CO2 emissions as we planned. Just a few words about the very special location of the future hopeful end destination of the 1520 line in Vienna. Why is Vienna that important? And that includes, of course, also part of the answer to the question, because in Vienna the 3 most important railway corridors of the European Union meet. That means distributing goods and bringing order to the upcoming goods wave that we are facing. Vienna is the very best location to do this. And of course, if we bring to our model shift thought the broad gauge as well, of course, that would be the most efficient, most sufficient, and of course, the best dry port that we have in Europe. That we are in trend is clear. I was, I think, giving some information about that in my introduction as well. From an Austrian perspective, our China traffic of our cargo daughter, ÖBB Rail Cargo Group, increased from 2018 to 2020 dramatically, and this year we cracked already the 1,000 freight trains in August. That means we are on the right track when it comes to the extension of the 1520 to make cargo more efficient. That cargo on the rail is green, I think this is nothing I have to explain. Everybody knows that. I don't want to waste your time, but these are the arguments that we have to present again and again and again to the political decision makers and, of course, to the potential investors. Because, as it was presented in the last presentation, we need, of course, a benchmarking system. What is a green project? To call up the money of the green bonds. Because from a European perspective, there is enough money in the international capital market that we could use for, I think, nearly all railway infrastructure projects in the European Union. And just a small key number, maybe it's interesting and it's also maybe also completing the other arguments. There was a study about the European Silk Road, where we tried to understand what gaps and what lags do we have in European infrastructure development. And of course there are a lot, especially in Germany, France and Spain, where there is a lot of possibility and a lot of chances to develop infrastructure. And just if you would invest 1 billion euros, sorry, 1 trillion euros, it would just solve 20% of the really necessary logistic gaps in Europe. And this 1 trillion would improve the added value in Europe by 3% and would create immediately more than 2 million jobs. So that means the potential of infrastructure development, of smart infrastructure development, and with smart, I mean, of course, digitization as well. These are the ways we have to go to come out of this crisis in the best way. This is a chart that we try to update regularly. It shows how the modal shift is organized in Russia, China, and the European Union. As we see in Russia, we have the greenest form of cargo transportation due to the very well-developed railway infrastructure. In China, they are improving. When I was updating this slide, we had in 2018 a modal shift of 13% in China. Now we have 14.45. And in the European Union, this is very sad news, in the European Union we are not able to bring more goods on rail. And this is actually one of the key arguments that is supporting our project as well. Because just if we are able to harmonize 1520 and the European gauge, then we are able to increase and improve modal shift. The last time when I was updating this presentation, the European Union were actually at 14% and is now decreasing. That means the targets of the European Commission are very ambitious. They're very beautiful, beautiful words, but the actions are missing. Benchmarking was now mentioned before. We received a certificate from the United Nations that we are matching actually the sustainability goals of the United Nations. We received the certificate a month before, and now the UN representative, Dr. Barbara Kolm, who is also the vice president of the Austrian National Bank, overhanded this certificate again to the Russian shareholder yesterday. It should just show that, of course, we have to provide information, we have to provide concepts to call up the international capital. Because, as we all know, our project is, on the Slovak part, a PPP project. That means we rely, of course, on international investors as well. And for that, it is necessary to prove the, I would say, the green core of our project. That is obviously given. The post-COVID agenda, as I mentioned before, is a combination of a green agenda and digitization. We have ambitious targets not only in the European Union, we have ambitious targets, of course, in the Russian Federation, we have ambitious targets in Kazakhstan, we have ambitious targets in Ukraine. The only thing that is missing are concrete projects. If you take a look on the project portfolio that is very often updated, for example, by the European Commission, you will see that the international capital market has much more to provide that is actually, than is actually called up for in the European Union. And the combination of the green agenda, meaning, for example, developing further railway industry and the railway infrastructure, in combination with the 4.0 trends like logistics 4.0, industry 4.0, payment and administration 4.0, is actually the key to build, to construct a sustainable infrastructure program that lasts not only the short-term needs, that lasts for the next 50 to 100 years. That should be the target. And just from an Austrian perspective, we are not only thinking about the railway infrastructure as such, we are also working on more efficient cargo wagons. There is a beautiful joint venture between Rail Cargo Group and Voestalpine, the Austrian steel producer, that worked out and finalized now a concept of super light wagons, including modular superstructures that in combination with a well-developed railway infrastructure will not only improve the cargo in sense of time, ecologicity in Europe and on the Eurasian plate, it will make it somehow, if everything works out, near to perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. I would like to ask the following question to our speaker, member of discussion online, Alexander Vladimirovich Grigoriev, Deputy Director General of Institute of Problems of Natural Monopolies. Alexander Vladimirovich, can you hear us? Yes. Good morning. I know that Institute of Problem of Monopolies since 2005 works on railway transport. In the past time has empirical database. What are the approaches to building strategies and ecology within Russian railways, and what approaches of the foreign countries? Actually, my presentation is partly dedicated to the subject. We truly, for a long time, in business of questions of railway transport, ecology, carbon regulation, and actually speaking, please, I need slide 2. Actually speaking, we truly actively participate in development of the strategy of Russian railways. Within the framework of this work, we substantially accumulated international experience. 10 companies out of 7 countries, Russia, Germany, France, UK, US, China, India. That is key, the most largest railway powers. We looked at experience and we've come to resume. Next slide, number 3. There is a number of common features of the aforesaid documents and certain differences. As the rule, ecological strategy is whether portion of general development strategy of the companies, otherwise part of the sustainable development strategy of the companies. Also look at realization. So different, very different in terms of volume and format of disclosed information, a bulk of data in those documents. So the approaches, there is no common approach. All are starting from the point of certain goals. Unquestionably want to emphasize that in the recent years, more and more reflect the questions in these documents about the fighting to the climate change, the measures to cut the pollutions and increase of energy efficiency. So it is reflected in all documents practically. I think it will occupy more space in the future. However, not only greenhouse gases pollution, also waste management, processing of waste is crucial element of ecological documents that are presented, or rather are prepared, that has been prepared by the railway companies. If briefly, among the analyzed companies, there are leaders, there are mediocre, they are lagging behind American Amtrak if you talk about aforesaid greenhouse gases per unit of railway transport rolling stock, that is CO2, 10,000 ton kilometers. Next slide. If we talk about goals, direction of realization of ecological strategy of the largest railway companies, then we would like to note the unquestionable leadership of Russian Railways Corporation in the area of the level of detail of elaboration of strategy. In terms of the coverage of different areas and information disclosure, that is, in this part, Russian Railways is unquestionable leader. No one else does so detailed disclosure compared to the competitors. Let's call them peers. Nobody elaborates those issues so much in ecological documents. Next slide. As to technology of decrease of negative impact against environment. There are two key blocks which we would like to highlight. First is waste management and processing of waste. International experience says that whether contract with specialized organizations which earn money by recycling of all kinds of waste. That is, this kind of activity is outsourced. Repeated usage and extension of life of materials such as composite material sleepers made of plastic, sorting and processing of the garments. An additional block within this block is treatment of the domestic waste, biodisposable treatment and generation of energy. In fact, more important and more interesting block related to decrease of the carbon content of transportation. This vector is also clear. First of all, electrification of infrastructure, transition to the alternative propulsion, and control of the fleet of rolling stock. These are larger blocks that influence decrease of the waste or carbon content of transportation process. Next slide. Our resume, our bottom line, we want to emphasize efficiency of ecological policy of railway companies. It in greater degree is dependent on efficiency of railway companies collaborating with the operators of rolling stock. Not only railway company per se is who we depend on and how ecological efficiency is with rail transport. It's how the railway companies respond to the challenges. The first relating to the vendors of rolling stock. There's demand for new technologies of decrease of the negative impact on environment, development and implementation of technological solutions for rolling stock. It's machine building industry responsibility. It is necessary and inevitably to collaborate tighter with vendors and producers of rolling stock and generally railway companies. Next, operator of rolling stock. Simple example. The noise is rail car. Who is interested? How to decrease noise impact among operators? It's not so high because noise is the responsibility of the infrastructure owner. Second stage. Going back to, as we stated, organization of trans-border carbon control. In our view, the most relevant aspect during next 20 years is decarbonization of transport, because climatic policy will influence more and more on rolling stock and technology of traffic control. It is needed to remember that railway transport who implements new technologies, the operators requests development and operation, operation. That's why railway companies, what I wanted to note at the end, what are the key challenges? Determination of strategic goals of decarbonization and consideration of real capacity of the traction, the propulsion, rolling stock, because we need to go through crossroads. So decide whether it's traction on natural gas or hydrogen or electric traction, what parameters are being decisive at the crossroads. For all companies in the coming 10, 15 years, so we can comply with new challenges, comply with agenda dictated in view of the environment protection. Thank you. Thank you very much, Alexander Vladimirovich. You said about competitors of Russian railways. Then you corrected yourself. First of all, Russian railways doesn't have competitors. In ecological agenda, Russian railways has allies and partners. Thank you very much. Next question. I'd like to ask Igor Valerievich Sakhin, Head of Department of Development of the Future Technologies in the Center of Future Department of Transmash Holding. So the Center of Future Technologies for Transmash Holding develops innovative solutions for the transport machine building. Implementation in Russian railways. What are developments addressing cutting carbon footprint? What does Transmash Holding consider when it develops rolling stock? Can they be economically efficient? Yes, Sergey, thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'd like to start by saying it's not a secret anymore that railway machinery, in terms of energy efficiency, is the best vehicle type. In terms of pollution, we can start presentation. In terms of the pollution, in terms of emission, it's quite low. I'd like to draw attention to the comprehensive approach towards the carbon footprint. Next slide, please. A number of factors decisive with rail transportation. They impact ecological footprint, the emissions. It's important to consider that during production of rolling stock, during transportation of fuel, during all stages of life cycle of railway transport. As to technology, next slide, please. Yes, thank you. I would like to present to you brief analysis of pros and cons regarding sources of energy. In order to cut carbon footprint, in order to improve ecological situation, of course, we pay special attention to technologies related to the future sources of energy. That is gas fuel, hybrids, and rolling stock. Let me show you some examples of the projects related to the future sources of energy. To your attention, slide relating to the diesel electric locomotive, unquestionable in terms of pollution. It's a very good solution, but at this point there is a number of questions related to optimization of system of storage. For now, it's quite expensive, it's luxury, but this project is underway. In 2023, we plan to have experimental sample. MK2 is hybrid. Next year, we plan to test of the shunting electric locomotive to work at the terminuses. In comparison to conventional, there's no emissions, so it's positive in terms of ecological situation. As to the hybrids, let me tell you that this type of solutions is not very good for universal tasks. It's rather good for concrete, specific objectives. And they have big future by now. And the next project, the V train. I'm sure you heard, it's designed based on the rail bus A3 hydrogen train for Sakhalin province. The project together with Rosatom, Russian Railways. Here we need to solve a number of the questions regarding infrastructure for maintenance and service of such machinery. We plan by 2025 to have a pilot sample. Next, we'll produce 7 consists. In case of testing and we have good results, I think it will be scaled out for all country. Based on the same project, we have developed and work on modular consist, where dependent on infrastructure we can use different sources of energy and we can anticipate different combinations using this modular approach. Unquestionably, there are technologies which allow to cut emissions, we cut the consumption of fuel, of rolling stock, with the help of different examples of solutions. In addition, I can tell you that we're working on noise reduction. We work on gas neutralizers, but those projects are at the development stage. As to the second question about production, TM Transmash Holding uses a program of ecological protection policy. It was introduced in the company. The plants use recycling of metal, recycling of plastic parts. We work on project related to 3D printing. That's to help decrease of the volume of waste. And it's about the stage of repair and maintenance. Brief resume. First, carbon footprint is a complex task. We have to look at all stages of life cycle from the point of view of how to reduce the footprint. In the near future, we'll use hybrid approach. Next, gas fuel. In 10-15 years, hydrogen will become the most efficient kind of alternative fuel. Important is to solve, and we do solutions now, and we work with ecology protection, production and usage for production of green technologies, and those initiatives that have to do with ecology and ecological policies of the company. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. Igor Valerievich, thank you very much. So we switch to the question, the founder of Nakhodka,
Artur Mukamedov. Your company is now one of the market leaders in purchasing railway cars whose life cycle is reaching its end for further utilization, for further scrapping. To what extent scrapping or reuse of railway cars can help to reach the green indicators? And what challenges, what limitations have you faced in your area of work? Good morning, dear colleagues. Sergey, thank you for this question. I'll begin answering this question by stating our mission and the reason that our company came into the transportation industry. Our mission is as follows. We decide the car's fate with maximum use for its owner and for the environment. Well, to begin with, regarding cars and the products that are received after it is scrapped, clearly the most effective, the cleanest, the most caring way to scrap a car is not to scrap it. I mean, we need to look for ways to use it. However, and there are always such chances. We have looked into it. There are always such chances throughout the CIS, for instance. Our cars, whose life cycle is over already, can be used, can be utilized on and on. I apologize before car builders for this comment. Still, if there are no such chances, we see the following picture. From 30 to 50% in terms of the weight, and from 40 to 60% of the cost are parts that can be used, can be repaired, and can be reused. The remaining part is sorted and unsorted waste, such as metallic scrap. Secondly, to increase the efficiency of the scrapping and the economy of this process, it is possible and is definitely necessary to do in-depth processing. In certain areas, for instance, with respect to vessels, we have increased the percentage of reusable parts to 80% by reselling the vessels from these cars to agricultural facilities, because they use them to store POL, mineral fertilizers, and water. And overall, the industry that is engaged in scrapping should be always looking into various opportunities to reuse various parts of the railway cars in other industries as substitutes for expensive parts. In particular, today, this is quite a relevant topic. Furthermore, the metal scrap can be sorted more effectively without mixing it with other waste, and can be then sold to small metallurgical plants as feedstock, which will help them to save on ferro feed. Thirdly, and very sadly, it's only thirdly, it's the value for the environment. Unfortunately, today there are no programs or other initiatives on the part of the stakeholders that will create conditions for good and green scrapping. So we only can hope that companies would use their own standards and would incur additional costs, for instance, on quality control, audit of contractors, or payment of the utilization excise, or logistics costs of the cleaning of the cars. Unfortunately, car owners that hand them over for scrapping don't want to do anything of this, because their key indicators, and this is normal, are to get the highest revenues, but without, unfortunately, minimizing the impact on the environment. On the other hand, the utilization process today is very primitive, and its technology is very backward. Only very few companies demonstrate specialized equipment such as hydraulic scissors. Many companies still use manual labor. Our contractors don't invest in their fixed assets because it is impossible to forecast how many cars would be handed over for utilization. Car owners are not interested in standards or equipment which is used to scrap their cars. They're only interested in the lowest possible price for the service and the highest possible price they can get for this old car. I would like to use this opportunity and encourage all the owners of the rolling stock that are going to scrap to utilize or are already in the process of utilizing their rolling stock. Dear colleagues, I encourage you to introduce new standards into your system, into your quality management systems. I encourage you to introduce new values, which will help you to control your contractors and to be able to incur certain costs yourselves. For instance, process your vessels with steam before you hand it over, so that the contractors would not have to incur these costs. Because it is all about our nature. Yes, thank you very much. Please take your seat. My next question is to Alexander Nikitin, Deputy CAO of SKF and head of the specialized department of Intver. Alexander, you represent a Swedish company, a global leader in ball bearing production, which is localized in Russia. For foreign experience of introducing green technologies, to what extent has this experience been used in your Russian subsidiary? Good morning, dear colleagues. You know, I would like to have a look at the environmental aspects of developing our business from the point of view of a machine building company. We are a company who is a contractor and a vendor of parts for the railway industry. And the experience that we have gained as a global company has also been used quite well in the Russian subsidiary, and I would like to tell you about it. I would like to begin by showing this excellent planet. When people started to fly into space, and when they saw how fragile and how beautiful our Earth is, this triggered the thinking process. We started to think that we have this planet which is so beautiful, which is inhabitable. It may stay so for many generations to come. But it is quite obvious today that to avoid any negative impact on the climate and on the environment, we, for our part, must think about changing our attitude to the recording of emissions, to ecology, and we need to start using greener technology. We believe that this is very, very important, and SKF, as a global company, has included clean technology policies in its strategy. This slide demonstrates the latest strategy of SKF. Clearly, we ensure reliable rotation, and we do our best to remain the leader in our business. But in addition to proposing new products to the market, to ensuring reliable revolution, we have now a new focus. We focus on clean technologies. This is one of our priorities, and we believe it will be necessary for us to develop successfully. As regards our internal production, and SKF is a production company that has more than 100 production facilities worldwide, so we have set ourselves a task to come to a neutral emission of GHG by year 2030. If we look at our development from year 2006 to 2019, then you see that we have been meeting these tasks quite successfully, and the revenue of the company has grown 60% over this time, while the energy consumption and emissions of greenhouse gases have reduced significantly. So we believe that this task is realistic. In addition to our internal processes that help us to use our technologies, and I will dwell on it a bit later, that helps us to become a cleaner production. We also offer to the market a whole range of technologies, latest technologies that enable us and our clients to reduce their impact on the environment. The first technology is recond oil. This is a solution to recondition industrial oils. Millions of tons of industrial oils are used in a linear fashion. That is, they're purchased, used, and then they are utilized in the disposed of. Clearly, this impacts the environment negatively. So SKF uses a totally new technology of double separation of oils and lubricants, which helps to make such oils, lubricants, to clean at a molecular level. First, the oil is cleaned from any additions, and then it is cleaned from degraded molecules of the oil. All you need to do here is to add some more oil. This helps to use this reconditioned oil ad infinitum. This technology is already available in the market, and we have been actively introducing it both at our own production facilities but also at our contractors' facilities. The second technology which we use is restoration of the ball bearings, which is the standard for all railway ball bearings. The technology looks as follows. We recondition the ball bearing, and into this we use less material, in particular steel, used for the rings of these ball bearings. For instance, a ball bearing which can work for 8 years can be reconditioned, and then it can be used for 16 or maybe even 24 years. So this is a life cycle of our railway ball bearings. The same applies to industrial ball bearings. This reduces GHG emissions up to 90%, because we don't have to make any new steel for these ball bearings. Now, speaking about our internal production, we have an example here of a high-tech project. This is a new production facility that has elements Industry 4.0 in Göteborg. Here, we don't have any standstills. The factory produces various types of ball bearings without any time for reconditioning. We make the same products that we used to produce before on conventional, in course with our conventional technologies on our conventional facilities. But this whole set of steps that we undertook on this facility helped us to reduce energy consumption by 30%. And clearly, what we also do, we have been implementing our strategy and using the achievements in our Russian production facility in Tver. Our axle box production plant in Tver is a new plant, which was built back in 2010. And it's Russia's first building that is certified by Green Construction Standard LEED in the US. So if we compare this building to our previous generation buildings, our costs are 35 to 50% lower, 35% less CO2 emissions, less water consumption, and all the hard waste is also minimized, and the impact on the environment is also as low as possible. In addition to making ball bearings, we're now finalizing the construction of another facility. This will be a workshop that will restore ball bearings. We have been doing this since 2014 at the Tver facility, but starting from next year, we'll have a special workshop that will restore both railway but also industrial ball bearings in Tver. In addition, by localizing these environmental friendly technologies, we're also thinking about full-scale localization of our railway production. Ball bearings for cargo cars have already been localized to an extent where they're considered Russian-made ball bearings. Furthermore, we have entered into special investment contracts with the Russian government, and by year 2025, we're going to localize production for cargo cars completely. All we need to do now is to localize the rails and the lubricants. That is all. Another important step that we have made at our Russian-based facilities, it was 2 years ago. This is a thermal processing line. This line was launched 2 years ago. Instead of conventional ovens for thermal processing, we use automated induction hardening lines, which doesn't take any material, any lubricants, etc., etc. This has enabled us to reduce CO2 emissions by 15% in the course of quenching. We already use this technology to produce all the ball bearings for our cargo cars for up to 25 tons. This is the world's first axle box ball bearings with surface quenching, surface induction quenching. And we're going to extend the range of products. We're going to offer more and more dimensions of these ball bearings on this line. There should be another picture with our beautiful planet. So what I would like to say here, that to preserve our planet, to keep it clean and beautiful, we need to use our efforts. And these efforts can be economically effective, more effective, less effective, but this is what we must do, because we're all responsible for this. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Alexander Viktorovich. I'd like to give the floor to Andreev Vladimirovich Ptichnikov. He will speak on line deputy head of Center of Responsible Usage of Resources in the Russian Academy of Science Geography Institute. Good morning. The Center of Responsible Nature Usage, based on Geographical Institute of Academy of Science in November 2020. As intellectual sense and driver of changes, what is your take on the green transportation as the service to the customer? What is the spectrum of services in terms of green transportation for both corporate customers and natural persons? Good morning, dear colleagues. I would like to really highlight this topic of green transportation and services with green transportation as new topic. Now we actively develop in the world. Just recently, by request of Russian Railways, conducted analysis of potential spectrum of services. I'd like to show several slides. May I look at my presentation, please? The next slide, number 2, please. I'd like to note that the green services means something what people are becoming more excited about. It seems to be that there is a concept that carbon-less transportation is less among all transportation modes. Many companies in transport are reoriented at railways. They more want have railway instead of automotive because of the carbon footprint. At the same time, this advantage of railways in the area of low carbon footprint today is not monetized at proper level. It seems there is a full spectrum of services that can be utilized. Next slide. First of all, let's look at what area the services can be rendered as green services. As I said, the railways speak of themselves as the most clean, the cleanest mode of transport with minimal carbon footprint. One has to understand that it has to do with, if you look at international standard on carbon footprint, it has to do first of all with the sphere of the scope 1. the railways. At the same time, for the customers of railways, it relates to the sphere of free as indirect greenhouse gases. That is, the need for the service arises when customers of Russian railways start showing interest in the sphere of indirect greenhouse gases reduction. In our opinion, the key driver of this process is that they have interest now in scope 3. This is liability to decarbonize and achieve carbon neutrality, which covers direct energy pollutions and emissions. At this point, initiative of decarbonization, achieving carbon neutrality in the process, the ratings, especially for the companies that occupy high points in this rating. These are the same companies who are interested in, let's say, green transport. Under its question, supply of products to low carbon market. There is supply of low carbon metals such as aluminum. It requires to meet indirect emissions. Next slide. And we believe that, let's say, there is a full spectrum of such services. The CO2 calculation during transportation, many railways in the world have the calculator of the CO2 emission. They conduct consulting on cutting CO2 emission while transporting cargo. Through the greener roads, if there's technical opportunity, the customers can choose the routes which are electrified, unlike diesel propulsion. Besides, they practice it's in the world as decrease the carbon footprint through acquisition by railways of the green electric power. The volume of emission of CO2, it means that the customers calculate carbon footprint and purchase the railways purchase certificates, which allows to cut volume of emissions, and in turn railways buy green energy, which happens by making electric power from nuclear power plants and other green sources of energy. Besides, for the customers that not only need decrease of carbon footprint, they can purchase cutting of the costs from the projects per volume of CO2. Such practice is in Deutsche Bahn. In certain cases, we can cut footprint of the route by changing structure of purchased electric energy structure. We can refuse to buy high carbon electric power and choose a less carbon intensive electric power, such as we can use nuclear power plants, hydropower plants. In general, in our opinion, demand for green services will show up in the next years. It will show actively since 2023, and it will grow. And gradually, we suppose that many customers of the Russian railways, they will be interested in green transportation and relevant services. There is a ground for big perfection of the Russian Railways operation. Thank you, Andreev Vladimirovich. Now I'd like to give the floor to the second expert who is present in the room, Anatoly Yakovlevich Yevshov, President of Acoustic Group. Anatoly Yakovlevich, good morning. How much the problem of the noise pollution generated by trains, and what is the future? Which measures can you apply to fight railway-generated, train-generated noise? Can we eliminate this problem in the future? Good morning, colleagues. The letter came to the addressee. I was born in railroaders family. I went to railway kindergarten. I went to railway school, and we lived in railway-owned house. We were 100 meters away from railway. After school, I graduated from Institute of Railway Engineers and worked for railway. So the noise of railway is known to me. Now about the substance. Fighting noise from railway is similar to the fight against the armory and the cartridge. Stronger is the bullet. They invent thicker and stronger armory. My experience in ecology, what do I see? As construction engineer, as the acoustic engineer, on one side, I'm so appreciative of those who construct and make locomotives and rail cars. They really became less noisy. I travel from Zelenograd to Leningradsky train station. I bow before them. Today, I use central diameter train. I see Sapsans and other trains. I'm talking about urban noise. Because when Sapsan is flying at high speed, other factors of noise, now talk about urban areas and the relevant problems. The noise of rolling stock dropped. What else happened? The following happened. People came to railway closer. Industrial parks were separated by the screens. Industrial enterprises were built next to the tracks. Now industrial parks in Moscow and large cities become into residential areas. The houses and kindergartens and schools and public buildings are being built next to tracks. The network is growing. We have new tram tracks. We have opened lines, service lines of metro. The suburban trains network is developing. Intensity is higher. Number of trains running by, the frequency is going up. Efficiency is when you have quantity switching to quality. Directly, that doesn't have to do with railways, or rather rolling stock. The bridges. In Moscow, there are many railway bridges, and in St. Petersburg as well. In Moscow, bridges are not concrete. They're made of steel. They're light. They're thin-walled. The rolling stock rolls by, and we have generated noise. This problem is very serious. That is why, on one side, things are not so bad, sources are quieter. On the other hand, the bullet becomes more energetic. What shall we do? There is a long-term principle, such as automotive transport, railway transport, is building deflectors. Oftentimes they help, but not everywhere. The high-rise building, people live on the high floor. You cannot make deflector of 6th floor high. The hurricane wind can destroy it, so it's inefficient. Second, the landscape. Sometimes landscape helps, sometimes not. Whereas deflection to other houses. And there is a method by applying of not high screens. They're being applied as standards in Finland, France, Spain. These are screens of about 1 meter high that work by different principle. They dissipate in the sky. I will not draw a picture. You have to understand that there's such a principle. It faces against organizational reasons of the Russian railways, plus the laughter, plus snow, sorry. We have snow in our country, it's a joke. One of the ways. Second, application of resilient ceilings. You have mass of moving mass together with rails, sleepers, the ballast, then the gasket, about 20-30 millimeters thick, and soil. vibration stay within ballast. Vibration does not transmit to the earth, so the subgrade doesn't radiate. It's especially important for the bridges, the tram lines, and surface metro next to the houses. What would I say about the future? If you assemble all railway wheel in your fist, the problem of noise by railway is the complex, not only rolling stock, but also bridges, buildings next to it. It's decisive, it's physics, as much as physics in aviation. During the same 50 years, remember, if you can, what happened in 60s and 70s. Since 1979, I live next to Zelenograd, next to Sheremetyevo Airport. When IL-62 flew, then really it was noisy. It was a thunder. I hear ooh every time I walk to the balcony. Domestic airplanes are not so noisy anymore. In aviation, every 10 years, decrease of noise by 2-3 decibels. In 50 years, roughly by 15-20 decibels noise decrease. It's more difficult there in the air and we're on the ground. We need to assemble together a organization, a body, and solve the problem of railway noise. It's quite doable. Nothing too complicated. It's more organizational by barrier rather than physical. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your attention, Anatoly Yakovlevich. I'd like to express my thanks to all participants of our dialogue today for such discussion, for such a deep understanding of the question, for deep presentations. I'd like to wish you a successful working day and continue work. Thank you.